things kicked off, to just introduce myself to everyone in the group. I'm J.R. Fisher. I am the current president of the board of the Delaware River Greenway Partnership. Tonight is
Adventures Along the Delaware.
So tonight we are doing Adventures Along the Delaware, correct? So without further ado, let me jump into that. So when it comes to amazing outdoor experiences available in New Jersey, South Jersey can sometimes be overlooked. This is a shame with the many phenomenal areas to hike and explore, from the Pine Barrens to the Bayshore and to the shore itself. The Delaware River, with pockets of green and its centuries of history, has some absolute gems. And tonight, our speaker this evening, Mike McCormick, has spent the last 7 years exploring South Jersey and will share some of his favorite parks along the Delaware River, including a sneak peek at the Petty's Island Preserve, which is scheduled to open this coming year in 2021. Mike is the founder and head writer at South Jersey Trails, a website documenting the 200 plus trails with parking, maps, trailheads, pictures, etc., that he has explored with a steady stream of stuffed animals in tow with his 4 children that have sometimes gotten dropped along the way. In addition to running a website, he oversees the Boy Scout troop, a Cub pack, and even manages to have a day job. He teaches at an elementary school. After features in the Philadelphia Inquirer, South Jersey Magazine, and the Sun papers, Mike has a following of 16,000 fellow hikers. We will post some links to some of the Mike's website and a couple other pieces of information for the Delaware River Greenway Partnership. This talk is one of many in the Delaware River Heritage Series sponsored by the Delaware River Greenway Partnership, which cover the different aspects of cultural, recreational, and natural heritage of the Delaware River. The Delaware River Greenway Partnership supports the Delaware River Scenic Byway, the Lower Delaware Wild and Scenic River Program, the Delaware River Water Trail, and also the Delaware River Heritage Trail. So without further ado, everyone, Mike McCormick. Thank you so much, Mike.
All right, thank you. Oh, my kids are making an early guest appearance here. Okay, Ben. All right, so hi, for those that do not know me, my name is Mike McCormick. So when I was asked to do this talk, I checked out the Delaware River Greenway Partnership website to see what sort of speakers they've had before. So they've had archaeologists, authors, naturalists, they had a doctor of anthropology, they've had museum curators, professional editors. I teach 3rd grade for a living, so I have few letters after my name than some of the previous speakers, but it also means that I will definitely know if you're playing on your phone during this talk. So you have been warned.
Daddy.
Hi. So who am I? So as you may have already guessed, I'm the father of 4 boys. So my boys are 8, 6, 3, and 1. That was my 3-year-old coming in to say hi. He is fascinated by the screen. So I run a Boy Scout troop, and I also run a Cub Scout pack. I love hiking, backpacking, and canoeing. And I travel with my wife and my family. We've seen 47 states, over half of the national parks so far. I like reading history books, particularly South Jersey history. And occasionally I even find time to go to work. So why am I speaking here today? Well, I'm speaking here because I had a dream. Feeding a cow. No, that's the wrong dream. Not that one. All right. This also was a good dream, but not this one. So my big dream was I was going to write a book. So, oh, my slides are not progressing. I'm sorry, give me one sec here. There it goes. All right. My wife is my technical advisor. Anyway, so this was the feeding a cow shot. All right. Good dream, but not that one. Anyway, so my dream was to write a book. So it didn't start exactly that way. So I had a 1-year-old and he had a lot of energy. I had a wife who had to go to work and also, occasionally needed breaks from the kid. So I started taking him out hiking. Why hiking? Because hiking is free and I like trees and stuff. And it's also because he was way happier whenever he went out as opposed to when he was in the house. So out we went hiking. So I know a few trails. I'd been in scouts and I like going outside once in a while, but I wanted to find some new places. So I did my fallback that I always go to when I want to learn new stuff, which is I head to the library. I took out a bunch of books on hiking in New Jersey and I opened them up and I was very excited. And I immediately realized that almost every single hike in the book was at least an hour and a half away in North Jersey. So I love hiking in North Jersey and it's really nice up there, but I need some places that were a little closer than an hour and a half away. So this is where my dream comes in. My dream was to write a book about hiking trails in South Jersey. So I set out immediately to hike some trails that I knew about. I took pictures, I made notes, and about 4 days later, I did the only sensible thing. I quit. Why? Because writing a book is really, really hard. But my wife had a blog at the time, and that looked way easier than a book. So I decided to do that instead. I started a blog. I got a snappy name, South Jersey Trails. And I set out on my new mission to write little hiking reviews online with some bad jokes and some pictures of questionable quality and a healthy amount of adventure. Figured it would take maybe 6, possibly 12 months to do this blog. After that, I would have hiked every single trail in South Jersey and I could move on with my life and on to another project. Figured maybe about 5 people would ever read this thing. 6 people if my mom could figure out how to get to the site, mostly so she could see pictures of her grandkids. So I'll find out later if my mom figured out how to get on here for tonight. So this whole thing did not quite go to plan. So it's been 7 years, almost 8. I have 3 more kids. I've had 200 plus trail reviews that I've written. I've had articles in the Philadelphia Inquirer, SJ Magazine, and a variety of local papers. I've had 1.5 million hits on the website, and I have a scarily large Facebook group with 16,000 people. Made a lot of new friends, and I've had countless adventures later, and I'm still at it. And the most amazing number to me is that I still have over 75 trails in South Jersey that I haven't done yet. And that list is growing all the time. So tonight, we're going to bring you along on 10 of our adventures. So each one of them will be along the Delaware River, and it will be in South Jersey. All but one of these you can go out and explore as soon as tomorrow. But if you do get in trouble with your boss, please do not use my name. Our hikes will run from Burlington County all the way down to Salem County, and we will tackle them in order from north to south. So the last piece of the puzzle before we jump in, which is my 4 adventure buddies. So as I said, they're currently 8, 6, 3, and 1. At least 2 of them can already identify more birds than I can. And the youngest one probably can too, but he's still working on words. So anyway, from left to right are my buddies. So I have Tree Rider, who's 6. Got the big fella, who's 1. The Prez, who is 8. And Kite Flyer, who is 3, and tried to stick his head in the screen earlier. So I'm well aware that they're much more popular than I am. They're occasionally recognized out in the world. Nobody has asked them for an autograph, at least not that I know of. All right, so our first stop for tonight. Without further ado, on to our adventures. The first stop is our northernmost one, the DNR Canal Towpath in the Abbott Marshlands between Trenton and Bordentown, up in Burlington County, right on the edge of Mercer County. So this is one of 5 trails in the 3,000-acre Abbott Marshlands. And it's the one that runs the closest to the Delaware River. It runs through the Duck Island section. So if you're ever driving down 295 and you see that big Duck Island sign, you're wondering what's that? Well, you're about to see what the Duck Island section looks like. So this is a 4.5-mile stretch of trail. It starts at the edge of Trenton and it goes down to Bordentown, New Jersey. It's part of a couple much wider trail networks. It's part of the 77-mile-long DNR Canal Towpath. It's part of the 60-mile-long Delaware River Heritage Trail, and it's a complementary route as part of the 3,000-mile East Coast Greenway walking biking trail that goes all the way up and down the East Coast. Even the 60 miles seemed like a little much for me and Kite Flyer that day, so we figured we'd just stick with the 4.5-mile stretch this time. So we made a deal at the beginning. I'd carry him for the first 2.25 miles, and then we'd switch and he'd carry me. Anyway, my wife dropped the 2 of us off and then drove the 2 oldest boys away to farm class. She said she'd come and pick us up at the end. Maybe. Now, the amazing part of hiking on a towpath is that it's a towpath. So what's a towpath? It's that flat, level, easy, obstruction-free path right next to a canal that follows along the path. So this is where the mules would walk when they were pulling canal boats along. So it's a picture of an old canal boat on a different part of the DNR Canal. Anyway, this particular canal was built through canal fever that ripped through the nation after the Erie Canal was such a success. This canal was built between 1831 and 1834 to make boat traffic between Philadelphia and New York City faster and easier. The canal peaked during the 1860s and 1870s when it moved coal from Pennsylvania to New York City. It stopped making money about 1892, but it stayed open all the way until the early 1930s. So what does all of this mean for hiking? It means it should be easy hiking, which is good because I had a baby and a backpack. Ooh, whoops. So apparently right before we went, they'd had one of those crazy microburst storms. So when we were there were folks starting to cut it up, and it was probably time that I should call my wife and get picked up. Or I could navigate a baby and a baby backpack through that mess and really hope that there were no more down trees on the other side. So the guys with the chainsaws looked at me like I was a little bit crazy, probably because I am, but Kite Flyer thought it was pretty funny. Anyway, with that hurdle cleared, it turned out to be smooth sailing the rest of the way. Much of the canal is dry in this first stretch, but it's still pretty awesome to be walking on history as you go. With it being a beautiful spring day, the baby had plenty of things to point at and noises to make. So one of the really interesting parts of how the canal, where the canal is that it has shadows cast on it by its replacements. So there's a rail line that runs right along the other side of the canal digging, which is now the path for the Trenton Light Rail Line. And then the trail actually goes right under I-295. So a little further down, you can actually park at that scenic overlook for Route 295, and you can access the trailhead from there. So past the highway, the trail begins to look a little more like it's running through a proper marshland. Flowers were everywhere, and fresh green leaves were everywhere too. Thankfully, the mosquitoes were not everywhere. Parts of the trail here pass near kayak trails through the marshes. I haven't done that yet, but someday. Anyway, Kite Flyer and I were enjoying a peaceful walk and some lovely conversation, and we were halfway through, which meant it was time to switch off so that I could be carried for a while. Every time. So, with nothing left to do but enjoy a quiet walk, I took in the history around me. Besides the towpath and the canal itself, there are other signs of the canal. Some of the more noticeable ones are the mile markers along the way. So as we neared Bordentown, we found the remains of the old canal lock just before the canal reached Crosswicks Creek. Here the canal left the towpath and took a walking bridge that's attached to the train bridge across the creek. We couldn't see it, but there are the remains of a ship located near the start of this bridge. So we finished crossing the bridge itself and climbed the short hill into Bordentown itself. The trail takes you down the street and turns at the house of Patience Wright. So who was she? She was a sculptor who moved to England and became recognized as the first American-born practitioner of that particular branch of art. She also reportedly served as a spy during the Revolutionary War while she was over there. Just as we passed the current train station and entered the park along the waterfront, someone decided to wake up. So he made the decision to walk, but he still wouldn't carry me. So here's where our ride picked us up. We enjoyed the view here where Crosswicks Creek enters the Delaware. But even the parking lot sits on historic land, as this was once the estate of the former King of Spain, Joseph Bonaparte, whose brother you might have heard of, Napoleon. So Joseph lived here in exile for over a decade. But leaving Kings behind, we head for our second hike to an island that is not an island. Amico Island County Park, which, if you have sharp eyes, you will notice is definitely a peninsula and not an island. This Knot Island in Delran is part of the Burlington County Park System and has 2 miles worth of trails. Now, this island seems a little weird. As you're walking around, you might wonder how it got here. Thankfully, historian Paul Schopp, hi Paul, who looks excellent in a top hat, can help us out. So during the 1930s, Walter Reeder's Delaware River Sand Dredging Company of Bordentown purchased the Springer Farm and the States Farm for their sand. Using dredges to mine sand and gravel from the track, the company created the large basin now known as Dredge Harbor in the process. Reeder piled any rocks encountered during the dredging operations on shore for future use. A local contractor purchased these rocks and constructed a series of unique stone houses and businesses adjacent to the harbor, which can still be seen today along the road. Following World War II, Reeder laid out Riverside Manor on land his company owned but did use for sand mining. In 1953, Reeder's Sand Company sold its remaining land holdings to Merrill Ambler's Amoco Sand and Gravel Company. Amoco continued the sand and gravel mining operations until at least the 1960s, creating Amoco Island in the process. Long in the thoughts of would-be developers, Burlington County acquired Amoco Island in 2001 from Duke University, who received title to the island as a gift from Merrill Ambler Jr. Since acquiring the site, Burlington County has developed the 55-acre island into another enjoyable jewel in the crown of the rapidly growing county park system. Several derelict wooden sand barges and scows can still be seen within the park along the interior shorelines. So with that all in mind, let's take our little walk. So parking in the lot, we walk across the isthmus, so you didn't know it'd be geography lessons today. Then hit the main intersection of the park. Here we take a left turn to walk around the outside of the island. This stretch has a number of nice looking trees, which is, something we enjoy in a hike. As we walk around it, it suddenly snows and then melts, and then my son gets 4 years older in seconds. A wet area also comes up on the right side. There's a walk to a little platform that you can use to look for birds among the reeds, which we always do. So we round the corner, Dredge Harbor comes into view. At one point, the body of water in front of you was mostly farm fields, but a dredging project and all that sand mining created this harbor, which was lucky for all those boats in the marina that would have had a tough time using their motors to cross farm fields. On the shore here are the remains of one of those ships or barges. Farther out, you can see a small island. Eventually, you'll come up with a nice viewing area for this island. This island is interesting because it's a rookery for over 100 pairs of blue herons. I know they're blue herons because the Prez is really into birds and told me they were blue herons. They have long legs and pointy beaks, and they nest here in the winter. The nests are made of sticks and are high up in the trees. I'm assuming the picture is blue herons. If not, just pretend for me. From this viewing area, a small unofficial trail will take you to a point in the Delaware. The official trail can backtrack toward the middle of the island for a bit. You'll then start finding areas where you can abandon the trail for an adventure on the beach instead, which we do pretty much every time. So much cool stuff to find on these beaches like rocks. Also, there's a nice view of the Delaware in front of you. Unfortunately, the tides also wash up a lot of trash. So if you want to take some extra trash with you when you visit, it's very much appreciated. The trail continues around to the northernmost point in the island. From here, there are some fine big rocks that were found during the dredging. For anyone who has spent time in the woods in New Jersey, fine big rocks are not something you come across very often, so enjoy these ones. You'll also get a nice view of the mouth of Rancocas Creek. Rancocas is wonderful for its long history, its beautiful paddling, and for many nice parks, good hiking trails along its banks. Some good folks are working hard to have it declared a national water trail, so best of luck to them. As for us, our journey today is not along the Rancocas, but instead will continue down the Delaware River to a short distance away, but a longer drive by way around, so it's our third stop, Taylor Wildlife Preserve. Of all our hikes today, this one has by far the prettiest map. So this is in Cinnaminson in Burlington County with about 3.5 miles of trails. Being our first private preserve for today, know that the maintenance of the trails here can be uneven, and it can be a bit of an adventure finding your way around. Our first 2 times here, we couldn't complete the trail loop because we couldn't figure it out. Our third time here, we worked it out, which is why that beautiful map was released right afterwards, of course. But despite it not being as well groomed as the fine parks of the Burlington County Park System, the adventure here has more to make up for some tight trails in the summer. There's a lot of interesting things to keep an eye out for, starting with this is the last active farm on the Delaware River between Camden and Trenton. So let's take our walk. So there are 2 parking lots. We'll start our walk today with the corner closer to the river. Please be respectful of the families that still live here. This is active farmland. We parked and we headed up the road and onto the trails. We worked our way down to the river, then took the trails in a counterclockwise direction. I prefer to do these trails in winter for better views and avoiding my dear friends, chiggers, and ticks, who delight in making my acquaintance whenever possible. Any confusing about finding parking or the trails goes away once you reach the majestic Delaware. There are fine views, some interesting trees, and the river to look at. It might seem weird, but the river can raise and lower as much as 5 feet a day here with the tides. Indeed, all of the trails we hike today on the Delaware are tidal. The tidal zone lasts all the way up to Trenton. If you're lucky, you might also get to watch a tugboat through your binoculars, which was pretty awesome for Dad as well as the Prez. Keep an eye out above us too. Bald eagles and other birds of prey can be spotted here. The trail then works its way around the little inlet before leading to the wetlands in the middle of the farm property. While the mosquitoes here make bad neighbors, the beavers here are pretty awesome. This is their lodge from a few years ago. There's also plenty of evidence of the beavers on the trees around here as well, so keep an eye out. The trails widen and follow a series of loops to explore the woods on the western end of the preserve. If they seem to amble in circles, it's probably because they amble in circles. Exploring is fun. You can also sneak in a few more views of the Delaware and some of the marsh. Eventually, the trails head through a patch of trees to the community garden section of the preserve. No one was out here in the patches of snow tending to their plot, but some birds were hanging out looking for a free meal. The trail then crosses the entrance road and enters the second parking lot before continuing past the trail kiosk. Then meanders past Winks Pond. This patch of woods was once farmland too, and there's still evidence of a foundation for a tenant house and some outbuildings here in the woods. These buildings were part of a local farm centered around the 1771 Joseph Wright House that stood on Tower Lane nearby. The house stood for 195 years before being demolished in the 1960s. Continuing around, the trail crosses the edge of Dredge Harbor. Here you can take a look at those blue heron rookeries from the other side where we saw them last at Amico Island. The trail continues to cross some narrow bridges till it reaches a raised area between a swamp and the Delaware. This area has some interesting birds and nice views, but also ends up becoming a depository of a lot of tidal trash. There's normal stuff like plastic bottles, but I've seen some weird stuff here over the years, including a child's plastic slide and a bowling ball. The Taylor farm leaves us with one more nice view before we cross a narrow footbridge and head toward the brick water pumping station. The trail then rejoins the road and heads back to where we parked the car. I hope you aren't too tired after our first 10 miles because we still have quite a ways to go. Our next stop is a dumping ground for the muck and mud that's been dredged up from the Delaware River by the Army Corps of Engineers. Sounds pretty terrible, huh? Well, Palmyra Nature Cove had the love to blossom into a beautiful stop on our journey. It sits at the southern boundary of Burlington County between the Delaware River and Pennsauken Creek and has some 8 miles of hiking trails. Some of them meander through the woods along dredged spoil lakes. These are good places to spot deer, wild turkeys, and Canada geese who walk really slowly ahead of you while freaking out your small child. Keep an eye out in the water and you might spot a zillion goldfish. Someone dumped a fish here at some point, and instead of getting eaten up quickly, they've taken over that pond. One of them is underwater part of the day. One of the trails is underwater part of the day as this beach trail gets covered up by the tides. We're going to leave those trails alone today, though, and focus on my favorite trail here, the Cove Trail. That trail heads away from the Nature Center, which is well worth the visit when it reopens after COVID, down a gravel road. The first part is not all that much fun, and I was a little sad the first time I walked it, but don't worry, you'll get more than just glimpses of Delaware down these little side trails soon. Trail eventually narrows a bit and enters the woods. There are woods trails off to the left here, but we'll keep heading straight. It's always a good stretch for deer and turkey, and when the leaves change, it's really nice. The trail will narrow bit by bit until you reach the cove. However, the trail does not go around the cove, but instead heads out on a progressively narrower stretch of land between the cove and the Delaware. Birders will delight in keeping an eye on both sides of the trail as the water conditions are very different for each side. A few boardwalks will lead out to viewing platforms too. Keep heading down the trail, even when it seems like it's too narrow to really be a trail anymore. I promise your patience will be rewarded with a bridge. This bridge heads over the mouth of the cove to reach a boardwalk on the other side. This boardwalk follows the southern end of the preserve, offering viewing platforms for both the cove and Pennsauken Creek, which now enters the Delaware River to our right. The land over here is swampier. Eventually, the boardwalk ends, and when it's the height of the summer, you can head past. When it's not the height of the summer, you can head past an old car. How on earth did that get back here? Before the trail dead ends at private property, you'll have to then head back the way you came, which isn't a bad thing. Keep an eye out for beavers and traces of beavers. And you can also let your baby loose on the beach if it isn't high tide. I usually walk back most of the way and take some of the woods trails to the parking lot. You can also stop and check out the Tacony Palmyra Bridge, especially if it's open to let a ship through. The bridge runs right through the park. But it's time to say goodbye to Palmyra Nature Cove and head to the least well-known park of today, the Kramer Hill Nature Preserve, our first preserve down the Delaware in Camden County. So the Kramer Hill Nature Preserve, owned by the Nature Conservancy, preserves a beautiful little piece of the waterfront in Camden, New Jersey. So when folks think of Camden, they're probably thinking of the aquarium or the battleship or maybe RCA and Campbell's soup. But more likely, they're thinking about Camden's rough reputation. Someone who taught kids from Camden for many years, the city of Camden gets the short end of the stick far too often. This waterfront area is a perfect example. Many places would develop their waterfront for recreation, an attractive waterfront area, business. Instead, this particular piece of land was a sewage treatment plant for 4 decades and was then neglected after the plant closed when it became a spot for illegal dumping. But what a difference a little TLC can make. The preserve only opened up in mid-2019 after an extensive 6-year cleanout. South Jersey Land and Water Trust, who helped with the cleanout, told the Courier Post they cleared out 500 tires, at least 10 burned out and rusted out cars, debris from a couple of abandoned homeless encampments, and about 10 full trash bins. For all this hard work, the result was 35 acres of waterfront woods and a touch of wilderness along the Delaware. The trails head down to a patch of wetlands first. The trails were a little soggy the day I went, but I made it through just fine. There are a lot of reeds along the way. A short jaunt through the woods brought you to the back channel of the Delaware. Why the back channel? Because the main channel of Delaware that the ships use is on the other side of the island out there, but more on that later. The trail heads in each direction, giving you options to explore. We headed right. Over that way was some more woods in recovery, plus a nice steep hill. Walking along, it was hard to believe that you were in Camden, New Jersey. The trail eventually parallels the road. There are some open areas this way with beautiful flowers in the right season. The trail then loops back to the small parking area. But back to that island, which is our next stop. This island has been known by many names: Saxamoxon Island, Treaty Island, and a Swedish name I won't even attempt. But today it's known as Petty's Island. The Delaware River near Philadelphia used to be the home of several large islands, most of which were dredged away in the name of progress. Petty's Island is one of the last ones remaining. So how did this one make it? Well, if you thought that 500 tires and almost a dozen abandoned cars was quite the reclamation project, then you haven't seen anything yet, because turning Petty's Island into a nature preserve is requiring removing an oil storage facility used by Citgo, along with a few other shipping remains. So this picture gives a pretty good idea of what needed to be done, not counting the tons and tons and tons of garbage that had to be picked up and hauled away by volunteers. So it was a project that's been going on for many years. So what makes this hike a little different is, unlike our other 9 stops today, you can't go here yet. The property is still owned by Citgo, at least for a few more years until the title is transferred to the Natural Lands Trust. The only way to access the island is on a guided hike or cleanup, which are organized and coordinated by the Audubon Society. You can sign up at the Audubon Society's Petty Island website for email notices about scheduled events, which fill up pretty insanely quickly. The good news is that Petty's Island is scheduled to open to the public in 2021, so it'll give everyone something to look forward to next year. I was lucky enough to snag a spot on one of these coveted tours back in June 2019, which was led by Robert Shin. Robert Shin, author of the book Along the Cooper River, among many of the hats he wears, leads a hike highlighting the history of this island, which means you now get a little sneak at Petty's Island. So hop in your virtual car, we'll drive past the guard booth and take a walk around the south end of Petty's Island. So the island itself has a very interesting history, and if I get anything wrong, I can assure you it was not the fault of Robert Shin. It was first bought from the Lenape by a Quaker woman, Elizabeth Kinsey, around 1680. Later it was owned by William Penn before being bought by its current namesake, John Petty, in 1732. The island would have been used probably for grazing animals and for some farming. In more recent times, it was proposed by leaders in Pennsauken. So Petty's Island is officially part of Pennsauken, despite the fact you have to drive from Pennsauken into Camden first to get onto the island, to turn it into a golf course and luxury housing. But a push was made to save the island as a nature preserve when a pair of bald eagles was found nesting there. In the end, the Venezuelan government, Citgo is owned by that country's government, made the decision to donate the island to the state of New Jersey as a nature preserve. What you'll find now is roughly 300 acres of woods and meadows, plus another few hundred acres of mudflats, sandwiched between the neighboring cities of Philadelphia and Camden, a remarkable amount of land to be set aside from development in such a densely populated area. These trails seem to largely be old roads, which makes for easy walking and nice wide trails. Most of the sections are going to be relatively young forests as the island begins to return to its natural state for the first time in centuries. It's interesting to see how plants will take root pretty much anywhere they can, like the trees in the bottom part of this slide. But the island's major draw is probably less what you can see on it than what you can see from it. Mud flats give great views of the Ben Franklin Bridge as well as Center City, Philadelphia. The island also offers views of the Barnegat Lightship, which is stuck in the mud in a marina across the water. This vessel was built in 1904 and did service as a navigation aid, think a floating lighthouse, off Cape May and Long Beach Island for most of the time between 1904 and 1967, with a break to serve as an inspection ship for vessels entering the Delaware River during World War II. Unfortunately, it's not in great shape, although the bell is now on display in Barnegat Lake. So my kids didn't get to go along this adventure, but I made a new friend even without their help. The island also sits off the mouth of the Cooper River. Cooper River was known as Cooper's Creek until it couldn't get federal funding because the funding for rivers is for rivers and not creek. So that problem was easily fixed. The canopy is thick enough in some places to give off some pretty good shade. And on the inside of that, are just some meadows and swampy areas. If it wasn't with such a large group of people, I'm sure there would have been great places to look for animals. The way this land is preserved, this park, when open, is to be used for passive recreation only. Therefore, there won't be any baseball or soccer fields here. The trail leaves the woods by the main channel side of the Delaware. Here, the evidence that there is not just a patch of woods becomes more evident. Started with some scattered remains of industry, such as a metal stake over some wood. Then building foundations began to appear. Finally, the trail emerged into what was once a vast parking area for shipping containers. This area is being restored as meadowland, and grass now approaches the slips that ships once used. Across the field is a metal skeleton and ramp that was used in loading and offloading shipping containers. Unlike the other buildings, oil storage silos, and other man-made structures, this building is staying. After some major TLC, it will become a nature center for the island. There will be large windows put in, which should make for an incredible view of Philadelphia. Of course, without the windows, this already makes for a pretty incredible view of Center City, but I'll feel much better with the smallest of my children visiting when some windows get put in. Sadly, this spot brought us to the end of our guided tour, and we weren't allowed to do any unguided touring. So the little group walked back to the meadow from the parking area, talking and asking questions. This little taste of Petty's Island was already a year and a half ago, and I can't wait to go back and see what it looks like now. Fingers crossed it'll be this year. Now we move on to the second half of our adventures. This half shifts us below Philadelphia, and the trails will gradually take us further away from the sprawl of the city. So we start by leaving Camden County and heading into Gloucester County, where we visit the Wheelbrader Wildlife Refuge in Westville. Wheelbrader is another odd one, as the entire refuge sits in the shadows of a power plant. Power plant burns trash, up to 500 tons a day of it, to create electricity. As part of their property, Wheelbrader maintains a 150-acre parcel of land along the Delaware that's open to the public. This is owned by Wheelbrader, who partner with several different local nature and ecological groups to maintain the trails. It's also a good spot to keep an eye out for Eagle Scout projects and Girl Scout Gold and Silver Awards, part of which there have been several. The front area contains a pavilion, rain garden, and butterfly garden. The mown path then leads to a tall fence which has a gap to allow hikers through. You take a left turn where you'll promptly walk next to a fence by a giant power plant that burns trash. The first stretch of the trail is right up smack against the fence and runs the length of two sides of the power plant. You can look right to see some trees and wetlands, or you can look left to see what's in the facility. It's very strange for a nature trail. Along the way, there are a few substantial bridges, although few of the areas really need them during normal conditions. First time we visited, we figured we had to be doing something wrong by following the fence, but we weren't. Hang in there, because eventually you move out onto a dirt road that serves as the trail and moves you away from the power plant. The trail is much more open here with a healthy amount of marsh to your left and some big puddles right in front of you. We'll head towards Timber Creek before hooking left to follow it. This waterway serves as the boundary between Camden and Gloucester counties. It was also near the mouth of Big Timber Creek that the Dutch established an early fort in about 1623 called Fort Nassau as part of the colony of New Netherland. No one's quite sure where this fort was located exactly, but it's likely the first European buildings ever built on the Delaware. The fort was abandoned in 1651, over 120 years before the United States became a country. Instead of a fort, there are now a few observation platforms. The kids never miss a chance to climb onto these to see what they can see. The trail eventually makes its way down to the Delaware River. Here, one can have a fine view of Center City and of Lincoln Financial Field. On a clear day, you can even hear the boos from here. The small beach area down here is usually where the kids like to hang out. They like to throw lots of rocks into the water, watch the ships go past, and keep an eye out for birds. Probably already mentioned that my two oldest boys are better with birds than I am. I try mostly to boo back at the Eagle Stadium. You can also see the Walt Whitman Bridge from the beach. When we get tired of rocks, by which I mean the kids decide they want a snack, we leave the water and walk down the power line cut to get back to the main road and trail. Soon the smokestack of the power plant comes back into view. Then it's back around the fence till we reach the car, stopping only to make sure no ancient Dutch soldiers are following behind us. Our next stop is a very short distance away, Red Bank County Park in National Park, Gloucester County. Down this far, the Delaware River's main purpose for many centuries now has been to serve as a highway to Philadelphia. Ships have been regularly coming up this way for centuries, and as long as ships have been making that trip, people have been trying to figure out a way to build forts to control the river traffic. It became even more important when the United States began to fight the British during the War for Independence. As you may remember from history class, the British had the best navy in the world at the time, while the Americans had almost no navy, and Philadelphia was a pretty important place due to its strategic supply of cheesesteaks, and also something about a continental Congress and being the largest city in the country. The result was Fort Mercer, one of the three built fort along with Fort Billingsworth in South Jersey and Fort Mifflin near what is now Philadelphia Airport to protect the city. And the end result of that today is Red Bank County Park, run by Gloucester County with about a mile walking loop. Walking from the parking lot toward the Delaware, it's impossible to miss the James and Ann Whitehall House, built in 1748 by a Quaker family that farmed this land. Today, it's a museum that's well worth a visit when it reopens after COVID. Post-COVID, there's also a playground nearby where your kids can play like historic colonial kids did, on plastic slides and using monkey bars. Once you reach the river, a paved walkway takes you along the waterfront. You can admire the Naval Yard from here, as well as Center City and the sports complex. The boats go by here. There are lovely sunsets, and occasionally someone will kayak by, or if really crazy, canoe by. If you want to know how to canoe, there's some crazy guy with a website that posted about going from Woodbury Creek to Red Bank. Oh. Anyway, if you can tear your eyes away from the water, you may have noticed that what looks suspiciously like cannon sticking from above the top of the rise. This is likely because there are cannon there sticking up from the top of the rise. That rise was Fort Mercer, who remains this park holds. The fort was built in 1777, which I'm sure was a discomfort to the nearby Quaker family that owned the land. They dug out trenches and plowed up the earth and used wooden spikes. The fort was later named for General Hugh Mercer, a Jersey man who had been killed at the Battle of Princeton. It was designed by Thaddeus Kosciuszko, famous for his engineering skills as well as having the hardest name to spell in the Continental Army. He's honored today with his own national park site in Philadelphia, the smallest national park site in the nation. A park ranger also wrote a polka about him. But back to the fort. It was built to be seen from this direction so it could stop the British ships from sailing up the Delaware. To help out, there was also a giant chain and a series of giant spikes. The theory was while the British tried to remove the spikes, the cannon at Fort Mercer could sink them. The fort was never seriously challenged from this direction, though. So the British decided to take Philadelphia through a circuitous route that involved sailing up the Chesapeake and marching through Maryland and Delaware. The problem for the British is when they took Philadelphia is they still couldn't tail their ships up the river to the city. So the British decided to send their dreaded Hessians to attack the fort. They crossed over at Cooper's Ferry, came up from Haddonfield, and in October of 1777, approached Fort Mercer. They now outnumbered the Americans almost 2-1, and the Americans weren't exactly renowned for their fighting skills at this point in the war. So Colonel von Donop, even though his surprise had been lost, and the Hessians attacked the fort. What resulted was a battle of less than an hour that utterly devastated the Hessians, who had over 500 casualties. Among them was the colonel, who was treated in the nearby home and died there. The Americans suffered less than 40 killed and wounded. The Hessians headed back over to Philadelphia. The fort was abandoned later on, but the damage had been done. The British left Philadelphia the following spring, never to return. The highlight of the hike up here is the view of the remains of some of the earthworks of the fort. It's also a very old battle monument under a protective roof. The highlight for most people, though, is the newer battle monument that towers above the field. The cannon are also pretty neat, not only because you can stand next to them with your kids and make cannon noises, but also because several of them were brought up from the wrecks of British ships near the fort. But that's enough fighting for one Delaware River presentation. Let's move on to something a little bit calmer. Stop 9 is Floodgates Road, Riverside Park, further down in Greenwich Township, Gloucester County. This is a 2-mile walk above the Delaware River, nearly all along a roadbed. The road is mostly shut down to traffic, hence all the grass on the road, which makes it a nice walk. The elevated roadway also gives you a great view of either the swamps on one side or the Delaware River on the other, so it's great when you want your kids to show you off while birding. We usually head south first when we visit here because habits. It allows some nice views of the Commodore Barry Bridge. There are also the remains of a few houses this way, which are very fun to look at from public property, that is the road, which should definitely not be entered. It's easy to tell where the trail ends this way, thanks to a large beam painted "Danger, Keep Out." So this end also showed us why you should really pay close attention to your surroundings, because our last adventure here, we spotted a baby snapping turtle. How he got up here and where he was heading, I'm not sure. After checking him out, the predator and I managed to get away from him with all of our fingers intact, at least as far as I'm aware. Heading back the way we came and passing over the massive floodgate, hence the name of the road, we head north. Here the trail curves behind a large ditch, losing sight of the Delaware River. We usually have better luck with birds and animals on this end of our hike. When we get tired, we turn around and head back to the car, admiring the flowers if it's still spring, huddling against the icy winds if it's winter, or pulling back smaller children to earth after the mosquitoes try to take off with them if it's summer. We often stop to watch the fishermen until loud chatter causes them to give us dirty looks. We usually hop back in the car then, stopping on our way out to visit the small pond behind the floodgate. And speaking of floodgates, okay, so this has nothing to do with floodgates, but we arrived at our final hike for today, Fort Mott State Park in Pennsville, Salem County. The hike at Fort Mott in Pennsville is a little under a mile. Unlike the other hikes, is very short on nature. What is long on is giant concrete gun emplacements. As the ships got bigger and the range of ship artillery increased, the defenses for the Delaware River had to move further and further down the river. By the late 1800s, the new defensive line for Philadelphia was much further down, starting here below what is now the Delaware Memorial Bridge. Similar to the 1700s, the defenses were made of 3 forts: Fort Mott in South Jersey, Fort DuPont in Delaware City in California. No, I'm just kidding, it's in Delaware. And Fort Delaware on Pea Patch Island in the middle of the river. These current fortifications were named after New Jersey native General Gershom Mott, who led the 6th New Jersey Infantry during the Civil War. Amazingly, not one of my children has been named Gershom yet, but there's still time. The fort was begun after the Civil War, but it didn't get very far. The current fort was hurriedly built in the lead up to the Spanish-American War in the 1890s. The trail starts by running up to and then over the fortifications. The stairway is open, you're welcome to go up it. First fortification for the parking lot is worth the climb. Watch for the wet spots, very slippery. The Delaware River is hardly a river anymore, so enjoy the long views over to scenic Delaware. The island in front of you is Pea Patch Island, which is part of Delaware. On top of it is Fort Delaware, a Civil War era fort that is now Delaware State Park. In addition to defending Delaware, the fort served as a Union prisoner of war camp, taking a number of Confederate prisoners, particularly after the Battle of Gettysburg. Post-COVID, you can take a ferry from Fort Mott to visit that fort, which has an excellent museum, cannon firing demonstrations, and even reenactors walking around. It's a nice little outing that's worth it for the ferry ride alone, even if it isn't Delaware. I'm just kidding. Delaware's great, small but mighty. Bring cash for the ferry. If you need to pay by card, you'll have to ride to Delaware City and then get off to buy tickets. So our tip of the hat to Delaware finish. It's time to go back down the stairs and head a few hundred feet north. Up to the main battery. Oh, I'm sorry. Up on top here, you have the most well-projected viewing area of any hike we've covered today. Once we work our way over to the main fortifications for Fort Mott, again, you can climb up the stairs to the top, which will give you an up-close look at the now empty gun emplacements. Handy displays show just how everything worked. Walking along the top of the wall, you can alternate between checking out the view, lovely as long as no enemy ships are coming, and peering down in the emplacements behind the wall. Even birds like the view. Eventually, you drop down and walk around to get behind the fortifications. Here you can see the guts of how the defenses work, including how ammunition was moved and stored and where the men would have been. You can even sneak up to one more gun emplacement. This part of the fortifications doesn't have the views at the top, but it's interesting how the whole thing was planned out and engineered. But there's another way to get here. You'll notice a big wall behind the batteries. This is called the parados. This wall served as the rear defense for the guns. You can take a trail up over the top of it, which gives unique views of the Delaware. Where the parados trail ends leads you back to where we were just a minute ago, the back of the fortifications. Peek into the rooms and see what's hiding in them. And if you'd like a little more to do at Fort Mott, you can check out the other part of the fort up around the parade ground. This fort was manned from 1897 to 1922 and had a contingent of soldiers here until the end of World War II. It's also a short drive to the adjacent National Cemetery. Here lie hundreds upon hundreds of Confederate prisoners who died at nearby Fort Delaware. Strangely enough, there are also several Nazi prisoners of war buried here who were imprisoned nearby during World War II. If you look carefully at your map, there's also a little sliver of Delaware attached to South Jersey here due to quirky boundary rules. While there's some lovely hikes along the water further south of here, we've already stretched the Delaware River to the limits of its riverdom in South Jersey. So this is where our adventure this evening comes to an end. A big thank you to Delaware River Greenway Partnership for allowing me to hijack everyone's evening and show you dozens of pictures of my children. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll now have a little question and answer session where you can ask me some questions. So to get these out of the way ahead of time, my favorite animal is cow. No, I can't believe they're all boys either. And Horace Greeley.
Mike, thank you so much. This is Mary Ann Carroll. I'm the Executive Director of the Delaware River Greenway Partnership, your sponsor for the lecture tonight. We had a series of comments. I'll read them quickly, and then I'll go on to the questions one by one that came up in the chat. Anyone else who would like to submit a question or comment now, feel free to do so via the chat. A few of the comments that came in, Mike. Carol said, not a question, just a huge thank you for your blog and your Facebook page. She's lived in South Jersey all her life, and you've introduced her and her family to places she never knew existed. Yvonne mentioned to consider the 6-mile run in Franklin Township / Somerset. It's near the towpath. Peter indicated that Kramer Hill Nature Preserve is actually owned by the Camden County Municipal Utilities Authority.
Oh, okay.
Lisa mentioned she posted a YouTube video worth looking at regarding Petty's Island. Margaret thanked you as well. She learned about some new trails and really appreciates it. And here are your questions. The first one's from Constantine. What would you say are the most unique things about South Jersey trails relative to those in other states or countries? Terrain, flora, fauna, history, trail design, etc.
I think the most special part is just we've got such a variety. When people think of trails, you know, people are going to think of mountains, people are going to think of climbing way up, people are going to think of beautiful views. And those are all great. But it's also the reason South Jersey kind of gets overlooked a lot. So even just those 10 hikes along the Delaware, there's a wide variety of different areas, and you might not get a lot of mountain views, but other parts of the country, you're not going to come across 2 or 3 different sites of forts that defended a river 300 years ago. You know, you go out into the Pine Barrens, and there's just, you know, there's almost no other place in the world like that. With the ecology and the plants and the fires, how the fires run everything. And then you end up down the shore, and you know most people think of the shore as, you know, beach houses. There are also some wonderful hikes there, and then the true undiscovered gem of New Jersey is definitely the Bayshore. I think a lot of people don't even realize it exists, but there's just so many amazing spots down there.
Tim asked if you have any suggestions for mountain biking.
So I am not great on mountain biking because I have this thing where I go really slow on bikes, which makes mountain biking a little bit lame. But I know the really popular spots in South Jersey, Sarah's Park in Sewell is very popular. Gloucester County College and Camden County College both have very popular mountain biking areas. There's a 16-mile mountain biking trail that leads out of Batstow out in the Pine Barrens. That actually one of my Eagle Scouts from my Boy Scout troop did the blazing on that many, many years ago. So those are the ones I know that are really popular in South Jersey.
Thanks. Sandy asked if there is a hiking trail in Roebling along the Delaware. She keeps hearing about a newish trail in that area.
Oh, so I don't know. I know there's a paved walkway down by the water. I haven't gotten a chance to walk that one yet because every time I get there, I don't get past the Roebling Museum. And they've got a nice little walking tour of the town that I've done a couple times. That's really nice. But yeah, I should get down there and get to that one.
Mike asked if you can make it so, what is the one area that currently isn't preserved that you would designate a park or preserve with hiking trails?
Ooh. I'm not sure. That's a hard question. Yeah, I'm not sure. Probably like there's some sand quarries out in the Pine Barrens that are very popular to explore and go hiking, and but they're still private property. So probably a place like that would be. There's some nice ones out there that would be nice if they could preserve them.
Victoria asked, what are your top favorite hiking recommendations in all of South Jersey for wildlife viewing, birds and more?
So we love Black Run Preserve in Evesham in particular, mostly because they have the most amazing beaver dams there. There used to be just one, and now they've got 2, and I think there's a 3rd one somewhere that we don't get too often. So that one's great for beavers. We've had really good luck when we go over by the dams to see the beavers all the time. For birds, you can't really get much better than Cape May. If you head down to Cape May, they've got Cape May, the Lighthouse State Park, and then they've got the nature preserve right next to the state park with the interconnecting trails. They've got all the flyways there, so there's a remarkable amount of birds there. And then Forsyth down by Atlantic City also has some pretty world-class birding.
Let's see. Brad asked you, what's the farthest you've ever hiked?
So the farthest I've ever hiked in one day is my friends and I, actually it was a Boy Scout problem. So my Boy Scouts got the brilliant idea to do the 53-mile Batona Trail in 2 days. So we did about 28 miles one day. And then we did the rest the next day plus a mile because we walked the wrong direction at 5 o'clock in the morning because it was dark. So.
Do you have any kayaking recommendations for South Jersey? And I could also refer our viewers tonight to the Delaware River Water Trail website. We recently updated with an interactive map, but do you have any particular recommendations for kayaking?
So I'm a canoe guy, but I love, I've really enjoyed Rancocas Creek. I've been trying to paddle all the sections of that. That's really nice. And I mentioned in my presentation, they're working on trying to get national status for that river. So that one's a lot of fun. And then my favorite place in the world to go is the Wading River out in Wharton State Forest. It's just always my favorite place to canoe. I know people kayak there all the time as well. So those would be my 1 and 2 recommendation, Francocas Creek and the Wading River.
What about fossils? Any favorite spot for locating fossils?
So I've never found a good spot. I know some people have luck actually down at the beaches. If you walk along the beaches, sometimes stuff will wash up. And I've heard that there's some good spots in North Jersey, but I haven't found any good spots down here.
Kelly shared with us that Batista is a good beginner trail for mountain biking. We have a question from Micah. What is up and coming of the Pipeline Trail in South Jersey that you're most excited about?
I would definitely say Petty's Island by far, just because actually now I'm even more excited now that I got to go there, but just the views of Philadelphia are amazing, and I can't wait till it's all cleared out and you can just cut loose to go exploring. I know they're also working on a trail that's going to start down in Cape May and go all the way up to High Point in North Jersey. So I know they've done a little bit of work on that. I know they don't say a whole lot until it's all done, but that should be really exciting when they have that all sorted out. Super.
And then just one final comment from Lisa. People love their blue hole forsythia in Galloway for birds. And they have the snowy owl there who's super cool. And then awesome. A question from George. Is it true that I don't know how to pronounce this word, pileated woodpeckers can be found in South Jersey?
So I'm not sure. Probably my 8-year-old would have a better answer than I would. I'm pretty bad with my birds. So, hi, I'm coming to visit.
Somebody else commented, Mike, that his name was Mike, that they are there. So.
Oh, okay, great.
So super. So thank you so much. I live a stone's throw from Duck Island and have never walked that. I think I'm going to make that my mission next weekend. So I appreciate learning about something in my backyard. And we're so pleased that we had over 100 folks join us for this lecture tonight. And I certainly enjoyed it. I hope everyone did. The Delaware River Greenway Partnership is a nonprofit that supports a number of initiatives, including the Lower Delaware Wild and Scenic River, the Delaware River Water Trail that I mentioned, the Delaware River Heritage Trail. So please go onto our website, Delaware River Greenway Partnership.org, for information about us and what we're about. Feel free to go on there, register for our mailing list so we can connect you to other free lectures that we'll be hosting come the new year. We try to do about 4 lectures a year. In the past, they've been in person, but I believe next year we'll continue to do them virtually. And we always try to focus on a subject related to the history of the Delaware River in some way that celebrates the river. So thank you again, Mike, for sharing your knowledge and your passion and your experiences with us. And hopefully we can connect again, all of us together, to learn more about the Delaware River. Thank you again, everyone. Good night.